That's my bad boy.
She's in the back of the vehicle. She's not in the driver's seat. It looks suspicious to me. The vehicle's upside down. Some of the one window is halfway down. One window is all the way down. Call the authorities.
That's my bad boy.
Paranoia is a thought process that causes a person to have an irrational suspicion or mistrust of other people. And people with paranoia might feel like they're being persecuted, that people are following them, that people are out to harm them or to get them. And they feel that threat of harm, even if they're not truly in danger. And sometimes it can be really difficult to talk sense into these people when they're in the middle of a paranoid episode, because for them, it feels very real. But for the people around them, they say, no, this is not actually being reflected in reality. And that can obviously cause a lot of distress for the person suffering the paranoia, but also difficulties in navigating their relationships. So there's a number of different types of causes or risk factors for paranoia. And paranoia as a symptom is something that oftentimes can arise during a very significantly stressful time in a person's life. That's not the only risk factor. Usually there's kind of a combination of maybe some familial risk or biological risk on top of what we call environmental or situational risk. The most common type of environmental or situational risk is extreme stress, and then The other most common type of environmental risk is actually drugs. The effects of certain types of recreational drugs have been known to essentially precipitate a paranoid episode. And the ones that are most associated with this are different classes of stimulants like cocaine, even too much Adderall, or even for some individuals, again, who have a real biological sensitivity, extreme amounts of caffeine. And so I mean, again, this is really a buildup. It's not that if you just have a lot of caffeine, you could just completely become paranoid. It's that usually there might be already a biological risk factor that's underlying that perhaps you didn't know was there. But a very, very stressful event or a type of substance can then provoke that particular biological predisposition and cause a paranoid episode. So paranoia is a class of symptoms. And as we described earlier, it's really a class of symptoms that's based very much in fear and this idea that people are out to get you and that perhaps people are trying to persecute you or harm you in some way. And that could actually arise from a number of different types of conditions or disorders. So somebody who has untreated PTSD may exhibit some paranoia. Someone who has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder with psychotic features could exhibit paranoia. But as you can see, it's transdiagnostic. It's not a symptom that is only assigned to one type of condition. Paranoid personality disorder is more specific. It's actually a group of conditions that falls under what we used to call cluster A personality disorders in the DSM. And all of these cluster A personality disorders involve odd or eccentric ways of thinking that are not fully rooted in reality. And so people with paranoid personality disorder, this is more of like a long-term characteristic that they have across multiple situations, across multiple people or multiple timeframes in their life. And the key is that they do have this unrelenting mistrust and suspicion of others. And we see that paranoid personality disorder tends to have its roots in late teens or early adulthood. They are more common in men than in women. And in general, people with paranoid personality disorder, they're always on guard. They're kind of very hyper vigilant to any kind of cues that other people might be trying to demean, harm, or threaten them, even if they don't necessarily have a reason to suspect this person. And it becomes more of like a habit or a characteristic that is associated with this individual. They tend to be very hypersensitive whenever they get criticized. They take that very poorly. And generally, they read more into social interactions than the average person. And usually, the way they interpret it is never favorable to themselves. It's about this person is trying to slight me in some way or trying to make me look bad in some way. And also, people with paranoid personality disorder can sometimes be cold and distant in their relationships with others, again, as a means of self-protection. And at other times, they can become extremely controlling and jealous. There's also this idea that people with paranoid personality disorder oftentimes will hold these beliefs that people are trying to attack them in all kinds of minuscule ways. And they'll be very obsessive about it. They'll try to dissect what they thought they heard in a conversation, what the hidden meaning was behind when somebody said a certain phrase to you. And obviously that can become quite obsessive and be very difficult for the person in relationship with them to try to talk them down from a ledge, so to speak. Generally, people with paranoid personality disorder usually aren't even getting that diagnosis until their late 20s, sometimes in their 30s, sometimes in their 40s. Personality disorders are diagnosed after the age of 18 because the idea is that personality doesn't really even start to form into something that's cohesive and consistent until somebody becomes an adult. And then, of course, it develops for many, many years after that. Interesting thing about all personality disorders is that they're not just showing up getting treatment for paranoid personality disorder. There's usually something else that they're dealing with. Maybe it's depression, maybe it's substance abuse. So they go to treatment, maybe by themselves or at the behest of the loved ones that say you need treatment. But there's not a lot of insight that a personality disorder might actually be the underpinnings of a lot of their distress. I think that in general, all personality disorders are a little tough for the person being diagnosed to accept them. That's sort of a hallmark symptom, cross-diagnostic symptom of all personality disorders, that there's a kind of a poor insight about their own personality condition. When somebody has a paranoid personality disorder and you try to diagnose them with such a condition, that could amp up their paranoia even more. The idea that people are out to harm them and that they're just trying to find a way to criticize them and label them. And that could really cause some difficulties, not only in relationships, but also the therapeutic process and trusting the therapist to be able to help them with whatever it is that they need help with.
The nature of the disorder is not likely to attract somebody into a therapist's office to even get this diagnosis in the first place. But if you could speak to the prevalency of PPD and what a supporter could do, whether this is a romantic supporter or a friend or loved one, if they believe that somebody they know has PPD or are showing those symptoms, or if they actually have the diagnosis.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's estimated that when we're talking about all of the different types of personality disorders, it's estimated that about 10 to 13% of the world's population suffers from some form of personality condition. But interestingly, paranoid personality disorder is actually one of the more common ones. It is estimated, at least in studies of the US, to be somewhere between 2.5% to 4.5% of individuals. Obviously, as you already pointed out, though, how reliable are those statistics? Because there may be people who are not even presenting for these studies, for example, or at treatment so that they can be diagnosed. So the natural inclination is actually that we've underestimated how many people actually have PPD. How can we help them to move past the diagnosis itself and understand how the symptoms are just affecting their life and hopefully motivating them in some way to want help for those types of symptoms and the causes of some of their distress, as opposed to being really focused on the name of the condition? Because it's really hard, I think, not only to reduce stigma among individuals who have personality disorder diagnoses, but certainly, as you've already alluded to, for somebody who has a paranoid personality disorder, that's very, very hard for them to understand that you're diagnosing them with something to try to help them rather than harm them. Ultimately, it will guide you in the right direction for the type of treatment that's really going to help your life. And so I think that one of the things that people who suffer from paranoid personality disorder, once they have received treatment and once it's taken them a little while, but they've understood, okay, this is my condition, it's actually greatly helped their relationship and their own self-efficacy. Imagine how refreshing it is through treatment and through insight development that you realize that actually people do care a lot more about you than you think. And that instead of having a bunch of people who are always trying to harm you, you actually have some great people who are on your side who want you to flourish. Having those beliefs be your fundamental beliefs can really change a person's life.